Question 8. The cell that is shown in the diagram is a galvanic cell. A galvanic cell is an electrochemical cell in which a spontaneous redox reaction occurs and generates current in the wire. We can tell that this is a galvanic cell and not an electrolytic cell because the two half cells are separated. First, we need to define electrolyte. An electrolyte is either a molten substance or a solution that contains mobile ions and so can conduct electricity. We can see in one half cell there are aluminium 3+ ions in the electrolyte, and in the other half cell there are zinc 2+ ions in the electrolyte. Next, we need to deduce whether the concentration of aluminium 3+ ions or zinc 2+ ions will increase during the reaction, and we must explain our answer. To answer this question, we need to know which species is oxidized and which is reduced. On the table of redox potentials, we can find the two half reactions involved, both written on the table as reduction reactions from left to right. Now, the more positive or less negative an electrode potential value is, means the element is more readily or more easily reduced. So zinc 2+ ions will be reduced to zinc metal and will come out of solution, and their concentration will decrease over time. Zinc will plate onto the zinc electrode. This is the half equation happening in the zinc half cell. Then, if a value is less positive or more negative, this tells us the element is more readily oxidized. So aluminium will be oxidized to aluminium 3+ ions, and these ions will go into the solution, and the concentration of aluminium 3+ ions will increase over time. Electrons lost by the aluminium atoms as they are oxidized will leave the aluminium electrode and travel up the wire to the cathode. This is the half equation happening in the aluminium half cell. Next, we must give the cell notation for the cell. In cell notation, the information about the two half cells is written on either side of a double line, which represents a salt bridge. On the left, we write the symbol of the anode and the species of the anode electrolyte. And on the right, we write the cathode electrolyte species and the cathode species. Oxidation always occurs at the anode, and so solid aluminium is the anode, and aluminium 3+ is the anode electrolyte species. And reduction occurs at the cathode, and so the species for the cathode electrolyte is zinc 2+ ions, and the cathode is made of zinc. Lastly, we must determine the mass of aluminium sulfate required to prepare a solution of volume 250 centimeters cubed. Specifically, we are told the conditions are standard conditions. Under standard conditions, electrolyte concentrations are 1 mole per decimeter cubed. And so, to work out the moles of aluminium ions in the aluminium half cell, we know the concentration is 1 mole per decimeter cubed, and we know the volume is 250 centimeters cubed, which is equivalent to 0.25 decimeters cubed. Solving, we get 0.25 moles of aluminium ions in the aluminium half cell at the start of the reaction. But we need to get the moles of aluminium sulfate needed to prepare this, and then from that the mass of aluminium sulfate. We know that 1 mole of aluminium sulfate produces 2 moles of aluminium ions, since there is a subscript of 2 next to aluminium in the salt formula. We can then work out the moles of aluminium sulfate needed to produce 0.25 moles of aluminium ions. Cross-multiplying and solving for x, we get 0.125 moles of aluminium sulfate required. All that is left to do is to find the mass of aluminium sulfate required by multiplying its moles, which we just calculated, by its molar mass. Remember, we can work out its molar mass using the periodic table, although we have not shown the molar mass calculation here. Solving, we get 42.75 grams of aluminium sulfate needed to prepare the aluminium ion electrolyte.